But unfortunately, in organizations, we build everything around the bad employee, the one that doesn't want to show up, the one that's an underperformer, the one that creates us issues, because that's what we're looking through everything. So unfortunately, even if you're the part of the 95, you're still treated and viewed through that lens of the underperformer.
Welcome to the Leader's Mindset, where we bring you conversations with leaders who are making an impact in business and our communities. Today, my guest is Kyle Smith. He's the founder and CEO of HRKyle Services. He spent 25 years in corporate HR, and now he helps other businesses with their talent management. Thanks for being here today, Kyle.
Well, Jason, thank you very much for having me.
So I look around at what I see, companies I work with, companies I don't work with, and a lot of companies don't treat talent as talent or do real talent management. So tell us about talent management, why it's important, and what the businesses you serve need help with.
Yeah, great question. So we've all seen this with a lot of different companies. They always say employees are our most important asset. Well, what we come to find out is that's not really true. They look at their equipment, their factories, all these other items as being the most important part of the business. But as you and I both know, that is a huge error. People are, in fact, the most important part of any business. So a big part of what we do in our work is work with organizations to make sure that their processes, their policies, how they approach their business truly is geared around that concept of people being the most important thing. And so that's what keeps us busy. That's where we work with organizations on issues such as recruiting and onboarding and mentor programs and internship programs and so on. So again, the systems look like what it is that they're saying. And that is, again, that people are the most important part.
Yeah, it's very difficult. A lot of companies say that, and it's very difficult for a lot of companies to follow through because people don't show up on a balance sheet, right?
Right. Yep.
You know, they show up as quite often as an expense on a profit and loss statement, and sometimes we lose the forest for the trees when we get up at that senior level and we're looking at those financial statements.
You know, that's a great point. And again, I think, as you and I have spoken before, Jason, that's short-sighted. You know, part of where employees show up is, in fact, on the expenses, but they also show up on the revenue side as well. And I think it's easier in some roles than others because if it's a salesperson or so on, you can directly attribute revenue, in this case, sales, to that salesperson's activity. But if you look throughout your organization, if you really were to dive into activity and really want to get into the statistics of it, it would, in fact, be easier to attribute value to every single employee. Because if you look at data across all industries, you always have a baseline. And based upon that, you can then attribute value to those individual employees. But as you can see, just from this basic example, that would require a lot of additional work. So to your point, a lot of organizations are not willing to put in that extra work. So they stop at the fact that, okay, based upon wages and benefits and all these other things that we offer to the employee, this is what this employee is costing us. But they don't take the analysis further to say, this is the value that the employee is bringing.
Yeah, that's a very traditional way of looking at a P&L, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think as we move into the 21st century, even further into the 21st century, we need to start thinking about that and get out of the old profit center, cost center model and start thinking about employees' individual contributions, because that's actually what we're expecting employees to do, is think about how their individual contributions contribute to the bigger picture, right?
Well, exactly. And it starts with an interview, right? In an interview, you're taught, and we teach our candidates to do this, demonstrate how you can add value. So that starts through the interview process. And most companies, again, they get this, they hire based upon the potential value that they see the employee being able to add. But unfortunately, once they make that hiring decision, they bring the person on board, they forget about everything that was talked about in the interview.
Yeah, there's a lot of room for improvement in a lot of companies, but you have something called the 95% rule. So what is that, and where are employers missing the boat when it comes to that rule?
Absolutely. If we look in most organizations, and again, I'm sure your listeners have experienced this as well, all of the policies, the procedures, how employees are treated, how they're viewed, every aspect of that is viewed through the lens of how can we control bad behavior, whether that's attendance, poor performance, etc. Everything is built around, in essence, poor performance. Well, in my book, and my experience tells me that that's only 5% of your employee population. I firmly believe, and the evidence proves this, that 95% of employees want to come in, they want to do their best, they're good people, they want to come in, they want to be contributors to the organization, they like the idea of working for that organization and being part of a team and making contributions and being engaged in what the business does and so on. And they want to leave at the end of the day safe and sound and be able to support their families and so on. So in my mind, that's the 95%, the good people. But unfortunately, in organizations, we build everything around the bad employee, the one that doesn't want to show up, the one that's an underperformer, the one that creates us issues, because that's what we're looking through everything. So unfortunately, even if you're the part of the 95, you're still treated and viewed through that lens of the underperformer.
Absolutely, and it stifles innovation and initiative, which almost every senior level leader I ever talked to wants their employees to engage in is initiative
Absolutely.
and accountability and innovation. We saw it in the Air Force all the
Yep.
time. The 4-star generals in DC were always saying, "Why can't we come up with more innovative solutions?" And at the front line, we were saying, "We have plenty of innovation solution. Your colonels and 1-stars always shoot them down."
Exactly, because they're looking for bad behavior rather than looking for innovation and new ideas. Because again, everything is structured around that mindset. So every policy, every procedure, everything is structured around look for bad behavior. Where's someone late? Where's someone missed a day? Where's someone underperformed? There's no procedures that say, where's someone that's coming up with an innovative idea? How do we recognize someone that looks truly engaged? How do we recognize above average performance? There really, in most organizations, there's no procedures or policies around that. So naturally, we're managing according to what we're provided and how the structure is established.
So, what are some things that employers can do to shift their focus away from the 5% that are causing them trouble and create a more positive environment for the 95%?
Well, first off, you build your structures around overperformance. So you have an understanding, like we spoke of a few moments ago. What is bare minimum? What is the standard that we will accept? And anything below that's unacceptable. But then you take the next step and say, anything above that's acceptable. So how do we then start with this standard, this bare minimum, and what are we going to do to recognize what above expectations, what does that look like? So we're going to define it. And then once we define it, we're going to say, how are we going to reward that? How are we going to recognize that? And honestly, and again, you know this from your experience, a lot of the reward and recognition is verbal, where you're going up to that person and you're saying, Jason, I've seen for the past week, you're really knocking it out of the park. Our standards are, here's our base standard and you've exceeded this expectation and you've exceeded that expectation, you've exceeded that. And for so many of our employees, that's a whole new concept for them. No one has ever approached them before and said, Jason, you're really overperforming. So that alone encourages that person to continue that overperformance. But then, of course, we do take it one step further and we build not only the measures going forward, but we build recognition going forward around those measures. So not only does that person receive recognition, but those in the environment see that that individual is receiving recognition based upon those standards. So what does that do? It's simple human nature. If I see Jason getting recognized for doing certain things, then guess what I'm more likely to do? I'm more likely to also do those same things because I also want recognition. Unfortunately, organizations in many cases are upside down on that. The person that typically gets the most attention, the most coaching, the most guidance is the underperformer. They're the one that's getting the most attention. Supervisors, managers are sitting in meetings saying, how can we, what do we need to do there? What do we need to do to get this person to do better? What do we need to do? And then you've got your top performers sitting over here. And again, we've seen it time and again, your top performers sitting over here saying, God, am I not worth their time? Am I not worth their effort? I must not be a good performer. I've had performers come to me, employees come to me that were identified as, we can't afford to lose that person. And they've told me before, I don't know why I'm staying here because I don't think the company values me. And I tell that to a leader, and they say, "Oh my gosh, I can't believe they would say that. How could they ever say that? We can't afford to lose Jason. If we lose Jason, we're going to be sunk." But Jason has no idea the organization feels that way because the company has spent so much time on Mary or Joe or whoever else over here who's the underperformer.
I agree 100%. I think, like you said, a lot of companies are upside down on this. They spend their time disproportionately on the lowest performers, and those folks do need to have time spent on them. I'm not
Mm-hmm.
saying that we want to spend time on them, but I'm a big believer in I'm glad you're talking about the recognition part, because that's so important, and I believe that recognition for when someone goes above and beyond really does need to be public recognition in a large forum. We do these things in the military called commanders calls, where
Yep.
people are brought up on stage and they highlight the really great things that people are doing.
Yep.
And that's twofold. One, you show the person you appreciate them.
Yep.
But and that's important because you don't want to lose those folks, and that's happening all over. People don't feel appreciated. But more importantly than that, when you're setting a standard and you're talking about what's above and beyond, it's really hard for people to know what's above and beyond if you don't show them what above and beyond is, right?
Exactly. And when you and I sit here and we say this, it seems so blatantly obvious, doesn't it? But yet, how many situations have we been in when you ask that question? That's one of the first questions I ask in any type of talent management, talent acquisition conversation is, what does above average performance look like? Because that's who we want to. If we can say, what does that above average performance look like? That helps me if I'm looking for future candidates for them. That helps me as I'm working with that organization to say, okay, based upon that, we need to rework your hiring practices. But you and I both know that stumps a lot of leaders because, again, they're not geared towards that mindset. They can easily rat off, what does underperformance look like? Well, here it is. They can give me 10 things at the drop of a hat. But when I ask them that same question, what does overperformance look like? In a lot of cases, and again, of no fault of their own, because this is how the system is created, they're stumped for a little bit.
Yeah, I think it's really important to ask that question. I mean, we all ask the question, who's not living up to standards, right? That's a day-to-day question in any organization.
Yeah.
But it's really important to say who's really doing a great job. And does everyone know they're doing a great job?
Yep.
Are we doing the little things like clapping our hands and saying, "Hey, everybody, look over here. Look at what Johnny's doing over here. This is really cool. I never thought of that. Did you guys know about that?" And that's sometimes all you need, right?
Exactly. And again, you and I've talked about this before. A lot of this isn't involved that we've got to create these programs and these recognition programs and do all these things. Like you said, in a lot of cases, military is a great example. They already have the structure built for this. So all you're doing is you're supporting that structure in a lot of cases. And quite honestly, and again, we know this, top performers are wired to be top performers. So they're going to do that if the situation's right. So they don't need a lot of recognition. A lot of times the verbal recognition is enough. And maybe you want to go a little bit beyond that, but top performers are going to perform no matter the circumstance, unless, again, it's geared against them. And what I find is a lot of situations are geared against the top performer. And I'll give you another example. We've all seen this. Top performers in a group, there's other low performers in that group. Guess what happens in a lot of cases there? And again, I know you know the answer to it. The top performer gets punished. How? Well, the low performers aren't producing as much. So guess who has to pick up the slack? The low performers don't show up as often. So guess who's got to pick up the slack? The low performers need some help with something. So guess who's got to pick up the slack? So the system is so upside down that not only do we not reward the top performer, we punish them for being a top performer because they have more time, they're more efficient, they can do the job better. So we, in essence, give them more work as a reward for being such a good performer.
Yeah, it's 100% true. And I think in some cases, adding more responsibility to top performer is a great thing. But
Right.
we, even in the Air Force, we saw the people who got pulled into work weekends to work special projects, the people who got pulled in to work over Christmas and holidays, all the top performers, right?
Yep.
Or the single people, but in many cases they were the same, right? So So, who are some organizations out there doing a great job at talent management, and what can we learn from them?
Well, I'm so glad you mentioned that. The best example, and the one that I like to give because it's so visible to a large number of people, and that is professional sports. And at first, when I say that, people are like, oh, ha, ha, ha. But think about it for just a moment. In professional sports, they do a good job because it's all visible to identify who are great performers and who are underperformers. They do a great job of recognizing top performers, right? There's all pro teams, there's all star teams, there's all of these things. We as spectators even are very well conditioned to recognize top performers, right? We can all do that. I don't know your sport of choice. I've got a few, but I know a top performer in baseball when I see them. Why? Because the stats are right there, and you can just visibly see that that person is a top performer. If you're a baseball fan, you know Babe Ruth is one of the greatest baseball players of all time, right? Because all the stats tell us that. So sports is a great example of this. And the other thing that sports does is you get recognition in public, you get correction in public, as I like to call it. So you get the confirming feedback, you get the correcting feedback. Uh, the standards are very set. Again, I'll pick on baseball as an example. You know that if someone's a 300 hitter or better, that's considered a great hitter. Anybody who's a fan of baseball knows that. If your batting average starts to creep down in the low 200s, you know that person's not really as good a player, right? And they look at home runs and they look at RBIs. So baseball, as an example, in all sports, are very good at defining all these measures, and they really look into it. It's incredible, the analysis, if you really get into sports and statistics around sports, and how much analysis there is to identify top performers and where improvement needs to be made, and low performers and so on. And all of those are addressed. In organizations, how many times do we see low performance ignored because the supervisor doesn't want to deal with it, or it's just too much trouble? That doesn't happen in professional sports. Why? Because there's a lot on the line. And in this case, it's money, it's entertainment, and all those things. Well, why the heck wouldn't we approach the work world in the same way? Why wouldn't we have an overabundance of numbers? And why wouldn't everybody know the standards by which top performers are recognized, and be able to recognize that and have it be all visible? Why wouldn't we? We've obviously proven through sports that we can do that. And it's very easy to do. And certainly in this day and age, with just this overabundance of data and the tools, everything's there to do it. So in my mind, in a lot of cases, we're making a conscious choice not to do it. But again, I think professional sports is a wonderful example.
Yeah, I think sports is a great example of that. Elite sports, especially
Yeah.
professional or college level sports,
Yep.
because while we all have a cap on where our innate talent and genetics and all of that, we're going to top out at some level of sports.
Right.
But what's great about sports is whatever level you're at, your performance is directly correlated to the work you put in, the attitude you have, the initiative you take to improve, whatever level you're at. And we see this most prominently at those elite sports levels, professional and college sports.
Exactly.
There's a story, I don't know how true it is, but there's a story way back like 20 some odd years ago. They had, I think it was NBA All-Star game in Las Vegas.
Okay.
And so, All-Star week, it's a slow week for the NBA. This isn't a huge deal, but a bunch of players are coming back from the club at like 4 a.m. Kobe Bryant's headed out to the gym.
Yep.
Shoot baskets and to practice, right? And somebody asked him about that. He's like, I don't ever let up. I always put the practice in. I always put the work in. These are my words, but I always turn the crank, right? I do what I need to do. I put in the work every day to be at the top of the game.
Exactly. And you think about your top performers in business, they're the same way. And you and I know those individuals. They put in the time. They are studying their craft. These are people that are reading up. They're keeping abreast of things that are happening in their industries and in their field of study. They're constantly working harder to be a good leader and understand that. They seek feedback from a lot of sources. Those are typically the people that will have a mentor or a coach in some way, shape, or form around them. So you're exactly right. We see those same tendencies in business, just not as prominent. And I think Kobe's a great example. People forget all of those things. All they typically will see is the performance that happened on the court. What they don't see is all the hours that are put in. And you're exactly right. We know that there's a direct correlation between, you know, great practices and great performances.
So, coming from the world of HR, and we do things a little bit different in the military. Leadership development in the military is really a function of your direct supervisor, your flight commander, your branch chief, whatever it is,
Yeah.
your squadron commander, etc. Our day-to-day managers are the ones who are really doing the day-to-day leadership development with everyone. I know not every organization is like that, but what do you think the role of HR is in leadership development, and what is the role of managers and leaders in the company? Put another way, where does the manager begin and HR end?
Yeah, great question. So I always say in every organization I've ever gone to from an HR perspective, the most important relationship is between employee and direct supervisor. And I never want to get in the way of that. And what I mean by that is I've had employees in the past that'll have a communication issue with their supervisor or something else, and they'll come to me, and that's fine because I'm there as a guide, a coach, a mentor, and so on. But what I don't do is I don't interfere with that relationship. So I don't say to that employee, okay, Jason, thank you for sharing that. Let me go talk with your boss for you. And so I never do that. So first and foremost, the most important relationship is between supervisor and employee. So we never want to in HR interfere with that. But our role is to make sure that any sort of roadblocks that may exist, whether they're organizationally created or they're created through the individuals, that we take the onus of making sure that those are broken down. So we're doing that. So if there needs to be some coaching on either side to facilitate communication, we're doing that. That may take the form, and it does in a lot of the cases I've been in, to leadership training. So then we create leadership training. So again, that's HR's responsibility to keep our finger on the pulse and say, what does this organization need, or what does this individual need to be better at their role? So again, we're not interfering, but we're keeping an eye on the situation to see what is needed here to make sure communication, that the leadership is effective. So again, we're kind of in a lot of ways, we're the watchdog of all of this. And it's our responsibility to keep track of this because we're ultimately in our role, we're responsible for employee relations, talent management, and all those things. That should rest organizationally in HR. And we should support our leaders at every level of the organization, and we should support our employees as well around those topics.
I love that. One of the biggest challenges in any organization is making sure that the aspirational values of the organization are followed in practice.
Yeah.
What are the challenges associated with that, and what can you recommend to leaders to help make sure that values aren't just a poster up on the wall?
Yeah, great question. For one, we need to go through a serious exercise of that. And we as an organization here at HRKyle, we're living proof of this. We went through a formal exercise of defining what our mission, vision, and values were. And we were very critical. And again, we're a smaller organization, but we do this on a larger scale with organizations as well. We were very critical to say, okay, we've said these, but do we really mean it? Can we point to proof in the actions that we take, in the way that we conduct our business, in the things that we do on a day-to-day, week-to-week, month-to-month basis that prove that we believe what it is we've written down here? And organizationally, we have to do this. And you know this as well as anything, because the military is very structured in this nature. It's got to start with the top. And if we don't see our senior leaders, those top leaders, walk in that walk, then we've got to call it into question. Again, this is where your internal HR comes in, or your external. They've got to have the authority and the backbone to go to a leader. And if it's Jason, say, Jason, you're the CEO of this company. I know we've said these are the things that we believe in, but I'm not seeing that. I'm not seeing these things happen. And again, it's got to start there, because you and I both know this. However those senior leaders act, doesn't matter what's written down or what they say, how they act is going to trickle down through the organization. It's uncanny. I've seen organizations where quite literally people dress the same, they talk the same verbiage and everything as that senior leader, that senior leadership group. And it's all subconscious. So if you have senior leaders that aren't living those values, I can guarantee you no one else throughout that organization is going to follow that. They're going to follow their example. So again,
Yeah.
here's where the HR comes in to be that neutral third party to say, I'm just not seeing that.
Yeah, I've seen military organizations, a squadron level and above, completely go downhill because a new senior leader comes in
Yep.
and does not live up to the values that they say they believe in, and it morale and productivity and output. It takes a few months, but it usually comes down to about zero.
Yep. Yep. And you're right. And even as you said, it takes a few months, and then you stop and think, like, because I've seen those situations too. It's like, gosh, that happened quick. Like, you can have a team that's really firing on all cylinders. You have a change at the top, and within, like you say, a few months, like, wow, what happened there? That one single person had that much of a disruptive effect.
Yeah, and when I say a few months, I mean like two. I don't mean
Yes,
like 6 or 8. I mean like
exactly.
like 6 to 8 weeks. It can happen.
Yeah, it's incredible. Yeah.
So one of the things you help your clients with is their talent acquisition and recruiting.
Yeah.
How is your philosophy on finding and matching talent different from what we might see in other
Yeah,
organizations?
great question. So I've got a couple things that I always say, and and by the way, I live these. So, I came from 25 years in corporate HR, and this is exactly how I handled and managed talent acquisition. So a couple things that I say. One, it's never no, it's just not right now. What that means is, if Jason applies to a position with our organization, we don't select him for that role. That doesn't mean Jason's out the door and, hey, good luck to you. Hey, have a great life. That just means, Jason, we didn't select you here, but I sure do want to keep in contact with you, because I know there's going to be some opportunities that come up in the future for you and I to regroup. So I'm going to keep Jason on my radar. And I joke, but it's true. Once you and I are connected, we're kind of stuck with each other. And I tell the story, and this is a true story. Earlier in my career, I met a young lady who lived in Texas. She was interested in sales. She was very early in her career at that point. She was bilingual, so she spoke very fluent English and very fluent Spanish. And I was impressed with her, but she wasn't quite where we needed her to be able to be hired for the position I was filling. But guess what? Her and I stayed in contact through all of these years, to the point I knew she got married. I knew she had a couple of kids. And you fast forward 7 years, and I had an opening where I needed somebody in chemical sales in that Texas area that was bilingual. She was the first person I called, and we hired her. That was 7 years difference. That's how I believe talent acquisition should look, for a few reasons. One, she was interested in our organization. Two, she had a ton of potential. So over that time, she grew. None of us stay stagnant. You or I look at ourselves 7 years ago. We're very different people from where we were 7 years ago. We've developed, we've grown, we picked up skills, we've met new people, we've furthered our competency and so on. That's why we stay in contact. Because we know those things are going to happen, and it's so much easier to select that person, because you know what else has happened? We've gotten to know each other more over the past 7 years. And I got to know more about her and who she was as a person and how she approached life. We've been interviewing for 7 years. So when I made that recommendation that we hire her, and it moved so quickly after that, because again, I knew who she was, I could give a lot of the background. That turned out to be an extremely effective hire. And in my mind, that's how you hire. And I hear organizations, well, we're too big to be able to do that or whatever. No, you're not. We live in a technology age now that supports any kind of contact you want to do. And I'm not saying that from theoretical. I'm saying that from everyday practice. I have technology here that enables me to regularly stay in contact with quite literally thousands of people in my network through the support of this technology, so I can keep track of them and who they are and recognize when they're getting promoted and so on. So we live in this beautiful age to where we can stay in contact with these individuals, because the other thing I know is, if Jason applied to my organization, he had a really good experience applying, you know what he's going to do? He's going to want to work for us. And the other thing he's going to do is he's going to talk to all his friends and say, you know what? I worked with Kyle at this organization. I had a really different experience. The guy communicated with me. He was very respectful. He wanted to get to know me. He's agreed to stay in contact with me and refer other openings, and so on. And I'll give you another story on that too, Jason. So here's a story to prove my point even further. So a couple of years back, organization I'm with needed a controller. We got down to two really good candidates. We selected one over the other only because this gentleman had already been a controller. The other gentleman had been an assistant controller, and we thought, well, if there's a tiebreaker here, it's that. So what I did was, though, I called up candidate number 2 and I said, hey, I just want to let you know personally, we loved interviewing. It was a tough choice. We selected another candidate. Here's the reason. And I gave him the reason. And I said, but I'll tell you what, I was so impressed with you that, one, I want to make sure we stay in contact, because if ever there's an opening comes open here, I want to refer you to that opening. But I said, I want to do this too. I've got a whole network of people. You are a very good candidate. I would be thrilled if you'd allow me to share you with someone else in my network that I know that needs a controller. And I did that. And this candidate starts to go through that interview process. And I'll be darned if 5 days later I get a call from our choice, the candidate we chose to hire. And he says, Kyle, I hate to do this. I loved you guys. It was a great experience. I was so excited to work with you. But my wife has had a serious health condition come up. And I just, with everything going on, I cannot switch jobs right now. I just cannot do it. She's going to need me to be with her. I'm going to put in for FMLA and so on. And I can't change jobs right now. I quickly go to the hiring manager. I tell them that story and I say, hey, guess what? You want me to reach out to choice number 2 because I've kept in contact with him? Well, of course the answer is yes. I reach out to choice number 2. We only lost a week, Jason, because choice number 2 said, oh my gosh, I'd love to come work with you. Why? Because we treated him well, with respect. We had a trust factor there. Clearly he knew we were very much open to open communication, being transparent. And he was appreciative of the interest that I personally had taken. He accepted that offer. We lost very little time. That's an unusual scenario, because typically what happens is candidate number 2 doesn't get any type of communication, or they just get this bland email. Sorry, we've moved on with other candidates. And that's the end of the communication. He or she may follow up for feedback. They're not going to get it. Somebody's not going to call them back because they don't want to deal with that difficult conversation. And that person falls by the wayside. When candidate number 1 removes themselves because of some situation happens, the search starts over again. It's got to start over. We're 4 to 6 to 8 weeks out before we're going to have somebody in the position again. That's the reality versus what we preach. So the answer, it's never no. It's just not right now. We respect people that have taken the interest to apply with us. We want to build relationships with them because we see the value in doing that. They see it as well. And it sure makes hiring a lot easier. And if you don't mind, and I'm sorry if I'm rambling just a little bit, I got one more story for you that's around this. So part of what I've always done is nurture my network in all different types of ways. Meaning, if I've got individuals that are part of other organizations, I love to bring them out and have them visit with us and see what we do and so on. So I did that at a prior employer, and they were impressed with our company and what we did and so on. And he said, you know what? I've got this employee, and his fiance, who's going to soon be his wife, she's graduating in May, and boy, I'd love to have her get a job with you if you ever have anything open. Would you be willing to talk with her? The answer always is yes. Be happy to. I'd love to talk with her. So I talk with this young lady for about a half an hour, get to know her. Very impressed as well. Smart, super smart. She's relocating to the area from somewhere up on the East Coast and so on. And she's going to be coming in soon. We don't have anything for her. I got no openings for her. I don't even anticipate having an opening. Well, fast forward to late September. I get word that our e-commerce manager has turned in her notice. And she's moving to another opportunity. The first person I call is that young lady that I spoke to 5 months earlier that I've kept in contact with, because she's a perfect fit for this role. We talk. She still hasn't found anything to fit her career goals and so on. So I bring her in for an interview. The team loves her. 8 days later, she starts. This is the reality. These are not made up stories. This is the reality of how you should be hiring. And it's about relationships. We've got the technology now in place to support these relationships. Let's take advantage of it. So, Jason, you asked the question, what's my theoretical perspective around hiring? It's that.
Well, what I love about that is that it is clear that that relationships are very important to you and have helped you be successful both for yourself and your companies. And I think there's some great advice in there for our young emerging leaders about networking.
Yep.
Right? These 2 rules you've got.
Yep.
It's not no, it's just not today.
Mm-hmm.
And if someone asks if they can introduce you to someone, you always say yes
every time. Yep.
And And a lot of people get real weird about networking because it kind of has a negative connotation to it. But I think whether you call it networking or not, or building relationships or whatever it is, remembering those two rules of it's never no, it's just not today. And if someone asks if they can introduce you, just say yes. I think it'll make people's ability to build new relationships, new professional relationships, a lot easier.
Well, Jason, it becomes non-threatening at that point. Because the other thing that I'm always doing is I'm always recruiting. Even I have nothing open. Here's another story for you. A few months ago, I did an interview locally here with a local TV station, and I'm waiting in the waiting area, and the previous gentleman walks out, and of course I strike up a conversation with him. We're right in the same area, and we start talking about what each other does and so on. He shares his story with me, and really a cool story of community service and so on. And I share with him what I do here, and I give him a business card, and I say, you know what? If you ever need help around anything related to work, or you know someone that needs help with that, give me a call. And to your point, I never screen out people. And I have another story on that, by the way. I never screen anybody out. If someone has taken the time and effort to refer someone to me, I'm always going to talk to them. That says a lot to me about how they feel about me. They respect me. They have a high opinion of me. Well, again, fast forward to just a couple of weeks ago, I get a call out of the blue from a number here, and I don't recognize it, but I answer it because that's also what I do. I answer phone calls. Imagine that. I don't let them go to voicemail unless I can't take the phone call. And again, I'm learning that's unusual in business too. But I take pride in being unusual, I guess. Well, it's this gentleman I met at the TV station several months ago. He has a friend who is a plant manager at a factory here, a little bit north of here. And this gentleman was part of an organization that was bought out by another company. And as a result, he's super unhappy. He wants to refer this gentleman to me so I can help this gentleman find a new job and whatever everything that means. I never asked him to do that, or anything. I mean, he just did it out of the blue. That's how this stuff works. So now I picked up a new client. And the other thing that does, and the way that we conduct business is, people are clients with us in all different ways. Maybe they start out as a client in us helping them find a new job, but then when they land that new job, guess what happens? They're now a client for us at that new job as well. Because again, we take pride in taking good care of people and respecting them and trusting them and so on. And what I've learned is that's unusual in this day and age. A lot of businesses conduct themselves transactionally. And I think you heard me say this before. We don't do anything in this organization transactionally. I don't care what it is. I don't care if it's somebody dropping off a package from UPS. That's never a transaction. We strike up a conversation. We try to get to know them a little bit. If it's a day out, we give them water. That's how we do business because that's the way we think business should be done. So nothing in what we do is transactional. And I find that's so unusual that people are drawn to that personally for their businesses and so on. I'll give you another quick example of how we don't screen people out. I'm an open networker. I don't care who you are. I'm happy to connect with you. I've had people from all walks of life and all backgrounds reach out to me and connect and so on. And I don't screen anybody out. But I sent a connection request on LinkedIn earlier this year, actually, to someone who was with a community organization. Her and I shared 26 common connections. And she, in her profile, literally claimed that she's a connector. She literally used those words. So I thought, well, gosh, we have a lot in common. She works with community organization. Those are things that I support here locally in the greater Akron area. So I sent her a connection request. Rather than accept it, she wrote me back and she said, before I accept your connection request, I'd like to know your intentions. Again, keeping in mind, I'm an open book on LinkedIn. Like my profile is fully visible. There's no private anything about it. I tell people who I am and what I do and so on. And I was floored by that response. And I'm not going to lie to you. I wrote a response back to say that I was, and that I was surprised that she said that. And, my intentions are good. We share 26 comments and 26 connections in common. She's with a local agency here in the area. I'm a big supporter of that. And I was just hoping to add to both of our networks. I had no ill intention whatsoever. I couldn't imagine that. And I think my profile spoke to that. Well, she was offended by that response. And needless to say, we didn't connect. She blocked me. And it's like, that I'll never understand. That doesn't register with me at all. But unfortunately, a lot of people in this world, and this is what I think makes networking a bit intimidating, a lot of people focus on that. In fact, I just had an issue with that this week, where someone, from what I could tell, screened me out because they didn't think I was important enough to connect with. And it's like, for the life of me, I don't understand that, because I see every connection as a valuable connection. And I believe that we're brought together for reasons. You and I were connected for a reason. And as far as I can tell, it's so that we can support each other's efforts and have a positive influence on each other. But I firmly believe that with everyone that I come across.
Well, I think that's an important lesson about networking, because just kind of like dating, you can't win them all. You can't win over everybody.
Mhm.
You're not gonna be somebody's type, and you
Yeah.
can't get worked up about it.
Yeah.
But speaking of winning, I want to take a break and play a game. Are you up for a
You
game?
know it. Absolutely.
All right. The name of this game is Rapid Response. I'm going to ask you a series of questions. I want you to respond with the first thing that comes to mind.
Mhm.
Doesn't need to be a one-word answer. Elaborate as much or as little as you'd like to, but we just want to ask some questions to help get to know Kyle a little bit, okay?
Yep. That's it.
All right, you ready?
Yep.
All right. Kyle Smith, rapid response round. Your time begins now. Podcast recommendation.
Well, I would say the HRKyle podcast, because that's one that I listen to. But beyond that, there's some good ones out there around documentaries and biographies and so on. And I don't have any particular names in my mind, but those are the ones that I like to listen to.
Yeah, I listen to a lot of business podcasts, a lot of leadership podcasts, but some of my favorite podcasts are the ones that are just about entertainment
Yep.
or sports, or something that just kind of gets me out of the things I'm thinking about all day long.
Agreed. Yeah. I like to listen to ones where people have accomplished something. So, I've listened to all those about, Colonel Sanders and the story of McDonald's and the story of Henry Ford and all those. I love those because I think there's always value in those stories and learning that. And there's a lot of parallels.
What is a practice you'd like to see more leaders embrace?
Walking around their facilities, walking around their work groups, and just having casual conversations.
Who is someone we should all be paying attention to?
Someone we should all be paying attention to. I think this is going to sound a little different. I think it's Jesus. I think it's Jesus Christ. I think that's someone that we should all be paying attention to. The messages that he spoke about several thousand years ago, they are as relevant now as they've ever been.
Not as different an answer as you might expect. We hear that a lot.
Good.
What is either your get pumped up song or your walk-on music?
Staying Alive. I consider that by the Bee Gees to be the greatest song of all time.
Good one. Manages to make a resurgence every couple of years, and I got to say I'm here for it.
Good. Well, we're very much in alignment there. I knew I liked you, Jason.
Biggest influence in your life?
Gosh, it's going to be, it's kind of transitioned over time a little bit. Now it's my son. My son's 19 years old now. He's just finished his first year in college, and you, as a parent, at least for me, you become very conscious of the influence and impact that you have over your children. And, now that I see him doing things that we've talked about and him following his aspirations, that has a big influence over me. The roles have changed a little bit as he's become an adult and gone out on his own.
We hear that answer a lot more than I would have expected too when we play this game. It's really cool.
Yeah.
A book everyone should read.
Diary of a Young Girl. It's about Anne Frank and her story during World War II. And if you don't know that story, I encourage you to look it up. I've always been drawn to that. I shouldn't say always, but certainly for probably the past 40 years, I would say, since I was a teenager and I read it for the first time when I was 13 years old. The big thing for me is just the optimism that she had in the face of what was a tremendously challenging situation, one that most of us could never fathom.
Absolutely. The best summertime activity in Ohio.
That's a good one. What do we like to do? For us, we've gotten to the point now, we like to take drives. There's just so many new and different things to see in Ohio. Ohio doesn't get the justice that it deserves. There's just so many different places to eat and visit, and museums and attractions and so on. And so many of these, really, no matter where you live in the state, are within an hour of anywhere that you're living, and it can be a totally different experience from one stop to the next.
Yeah, absolutely. Ohio is a very big and diverse place.
Yep.
I've been to Northern Ohio. I've been to Southern Ohio. I have not had the chili on the spaghetti yet. But I know that's a thing in Ohio. So
it is. We try to do Skyline Chili, which is one of the inventors of that, for lack of a better term. We try to do that at least every 4 to 6 weeks.
All right.
Yeah.
What is your dream vacation spot?
It's the one that we've been going to now for about 8 or 9 years. We love Virginia Beach. For us, it's a wonderful place to go. We can park the car and for a week just walk and enjoy everything that the area has to offer. We find it to be very family friendly, and there's some history around there, and we've actually got some familial connections to that area. So that, for us, that's a dream vacation. And honestly, it's anywhere that I get to spend time with my wife and my son. Unfortunately, he doesn't go with us now, but those times are important to me.
Yeah, well, you said he's 19, right?
Yeah.
So he's in that zone. He'll get over that and start going on vacation in a few years.
Yeah, looking forward to that again, definitely.
What is a trend you're excited about?
Artificial intelligence. I am excited about that. I think there's a lot to be excited there, and I'm so curious to see where it's going and how we're using it and how we can use it effectively and ethically and legally and so on. That we're incorporating it throughout our business now. It's just amazing to see where we can go with it and just the possibilities going forward.
Yeah, I think AI is fascinating. I think it's going to change the world. I think it's going to be like printing press level change the world. And like not any changes like we've had in the last 200 years. This is going to be like a millennium, once in a millennium kind of change.
Yep.
And I'm all for it. I'm like, let's get the gas pedal down on it. But let's just keep in mind, let's build this and train this in such a way that robots can do what robots are good at, humans can do what humans are good at, and we can enhance our own humanity through the use of AI.
Bingo. You and I are in perfect alignment there, Jason. I feel exactly the same way.
All right, last one. Favorite sports team or player?
Favorite sports team or player? Boy, that's a tough one. My inclination is to say it's probably the Cleveland Cavaliers right now. I like where they're going and what they've built there and what they stand for. Favorite player? Gosh, if it's a current player, he's not playing anymore, but Peyton Manning, I would say would be one of my favorites right now.
Yeah, Peyton's great.
Yeah,
he's a legend.
Yep.
Class act, funny guy.
Yep.
No complaints.
Exactly.
All right. Well, thanks for playing our game. It's always fun to get to know a little bit more about our guests than we would from the business questions. So your background is a little bit different from a typical HR career.
Yeah.
You have formal education and training in counseling.
I do.
What made you pursue that field of study, and how does it help you do what you do?
Yeah, great question. So HR for me, and even my prior work before I ever got into human resources, it's always about people. I truly, and I can say this from the bottom of my heart, I love to work with people. I really do. I love the challenging situations. The situations that other people shy away from, I enjoy. And I think that was one of the draws with counseling is I think overall in our lifetime right now, there's a strong need for people who are skilled in counseling, because a lot of what counseling is about is having very balanced, equal conversations with individuals. And I think that's something that we're getting away from a little bit. And those counseling skills have served me so well in certainly situations where they were positive and the confirming feedback was needed, but they've also served me very well in situations where it was a difficult conversation, or it was a challenging moment, or it was a tense situation, or I needed to provide some correcting feedback and so on. So it's really served me well from a communication standpoint in my work as an HR professional.
What is motivational interviewing, and what are some principles we can all take from it to help us do a better job in our day-to-day as leaders?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked about motivational interviewing. So what motivational interviewing is, and I'll try to summarize it relatively simple, is it's a way of communicating with another individual so that you're basically following along how they lead the conversation. And it's based upon the principle, as far as I'm concerned, that says most of us in most situations and scenarios know the right answer. We know what we should do. We know the path that we should take. But what we need is a person there with us, and that's the other person, that affirms that for us, that has trust in what we already know, and believes also, Jason, that we know what's best for ourselves. So it's really putting a lot of faith in that person, and is expressing that faith to say, Jason knows the right answer to this situation. Jason knows what he should do. Jason's a smart person. He knows the right way here. All that I'm here to do is support him in this journey of reaching the conclusion and the affirmation that he does know these things, that he does know the right answer. He does know what he should do. And he's a smart guy, and he's going to do the right thing as long as I'm here to support him.
And that is very different from how a lot of managers and leaders are operating today. I mean, I'm encouraged to get this word out to people that there's something they can do that's different.
Yeah.
You talked about difficult conversations earlier,
Yeah.
and talent management and HR and day-to-day leadership is full of those.
Yep.
What's some advice you have for young emerging leaders about having those difficult conversations and being able to step up to have those difficult conversations?
Yep. For one, as a leader, you owe it to your team to have conversations that are quote unquote difficult. You owe it to them. Anybody can lead a top performing team, but it takes a true leader to lead a team that needs some coaching, that needs some mentoring, needs some guidance. And I really prefer in practice to stay away from labels. That's why I even relabeled thing as either correcting or confirming, because I don't want to label things as good or bad or whatever. In all reality, I don't see a lot of situations in work as being, oh, that's a good situation or that's a bad situation. So I try to get away from those labels and just say, this is a situation that we have to deal with, because just as in something that's a positive, you have a responsibility as a leader to address that, to say, Jason, you're doing a great job here. Keep up the good work. But by the same token, you have a responsibility to Jason to say, Jason, now what you're doing here, I need you to change that a little bit. Because here's what we know, and the research proves this. People want to know if they're doing something wrong. Nobody ever said, please don't tell me when I'm doing something dumb, stupid, dangerous, or whatever. In a work situation especially, we want to be told if we're doing something wrong. We don't want to be allowed to continue any longer than necessary to do something in an incorrect way. So that would be my advice to leaders. Two things. One, you owe it to your team. And two, you owe it to that person because they want to. Wouldn't you like to know, if you were doing your job and you thought you were doing it the right way, but you were doing it the wrong way? Wouldn't you want to know from your boss that they said, you know what? You need to change what you're doing there. Of course, everybody says yes. And that's truly how we feel. So those situations that we think are difficult, oh my gosh, I got to tell this person some bad news. The person would rather be told the bad news and be allowed to continue doing something wrong.
One of the hardest transitions for emerging leaders to make is to go from tactical thinking to strategic thinking.
Yep.
What's your advice for those young leaders on how to start thinking more about the big picture and applying it in their day-to-day activities?
The most knowledgeable person on most jobs is the person that's done it for a period of time, first and foremost. Why is that important? Because immediately you establish in that leader's mind, the expert's the person doing it. I'm not the expert. And I tell leaders this all the time. You weren't promoted into a leadership role to be the expert on every one of these jobs. You were promoted into a leadership role to support the experts on every one of these jobs. So first and foremost, that gets us out of a lot of this tactical nonsense, because, and I do consider it nonsense, leaders that devote too much of their time on the tactical are wasting their time. That's not why they were put into that role. Again, they were put into that role to support the people that are experts and to recognize expertise versus immaturity or novice behavior. That's what they were put in there before to do. They weren't put in there to do the job. If we wanted them to do the job, they would have been given the job. So right off the bat, you change that mentality. And the other thing that I say with when I talk to leaders is I share a little bit my own perspective. I don't want to be somebody's boss. I just don't want to be. I want to be somebody's coach, mentor, guide, support system, scaffolding, whatever we want to call those things. But I'm really turned off by that term boss. I don't like what it connotates. And I think that's how leaders have to think. I don't want to be somebody's boss. Boss means I'm standing over you. I'm telling you what to do. I'm right there waiting for a bad thing to happen. I want to be thinking, how can I bring this team together? How can I make sure that each and every person is focusing on their maximum potential? And the other thing too is, where are we heading as an organization? So I'm asking myself those questions too. So as a leader, I'm trying to make sure that I'm as plugged in this direction as I am this direction. And in a lot of cases, I'm probably going to be a little bit more plugged in this direction than I am this. And if you can do that, that shifts your mindset away from this tactical to being much more strategic.
Yeah, I think it's really important for our frontline leaders to be thinking about 2 levels ahead. You hear the advice, solve your boss's problems. I tell people, solve your boss's problems. Because even if you can't do that, at least you know what they are and what's important to them. But it's funny because when I was in the Air Force, I saw, especially as I got up to more senior roles, I saw this all the time as senior leaders complaining that people didn't understand the big picture. But I also saw they weren't doing anything to transmit that big picture down to the front line. There was kind of a wall there, a barrier. So how can we as more senior leaders help guide, mentor emerging leaders through that transition from tactical to strategic?
Jason, you made me laugh there for a good reason. You reminded me of one of the talks that I've given, and it's about effective communication. And I laugh because I get a strong reaction when I bring up the one slide, and people are always a little thrown by this at first. And I tell them, if your communication is ineffective, that's on you. It's not on the receiver, it's on the sender. And then I'll stop right there and I look around the room and I look for reactions. And, at first there's this, well, whatever. But then as you think about it, it really sinks in. If your message is ineffective, it's not the receiver, it's the sender. And in all walks of life, every other walk of life, we know that to be true. No one ever said, and the plant is the best example I give. I love to give that in a lot of things because I think there's a lot of parallels. No one ever threw out a really nice plant because it wasn't acting like it should have. They first looked at themselves and they said, gosh, there's something I'm doing wrong here. It's getting too much sun. It's not getting enough sun. It's getting too much water. It's not getting enough water. The soil's not nurtured enough. That's how we handle plants. But with people, too often we say, that person is struggling. Boy, there's something wrong with them. But we would never do that with a plant. The plant's struggling. That rose just isn't doing well. There's something wrong with that rose. We would never do that. We would look at what we're doing first to say, and we need to do that with individuals as well. We need to take a step back and say, they're not getting the message. What's happening? What is it about my delivery? And I always tell communicators, look at the who, what, when, where, and why. Because somewhere there's a breakdown in that. The who, are you communicating to the right people? Have you given them enough notice? In marketing, we look at that all the time. It takes 7 to 11 touch points before someone decides to buy your product. So we just know that going in. We don't say, okay, I've done 3 ads, they haven't bought, forget it. This is a failure. We have to think of that same way with people. So are we telling them enough? Have we told them enough ways? The where. Is our delivery mechanism effective? I know managers, and you probably come across this too, they manage totally by email. Every instruction, guidance, feedback, or whatever is email. Well, sometimes people don't take instruction or communication well by email. They need to have it verbally given to them, or they need to have it demonstrated once, and then they pick it up. So you're looking at that mechanism. So when it comes to communication, and if it's not effective, rather than do this, look at the 3 other fingers that are pointing towards you, because that's where the problem starts.
Mhm. I can't tell you the number of conversations I had in my last few years in the Air Force with a peer who would complain that, well, they don't understand that this affects something downrange. This affects something operational. And I would say to them, well, did you tell them that, dummy?
Right. Exactly.
And then they would get real mad for a second and then realize they hadn't told them that.
Yep. You've experienced exactly what I talked about. It's uncanny in those presentations where I say, if your communication's not effective, you're the problem. And I get the same reaction. It's like, well, how dare he say that? And then we sit there for a minute like, well, you know what? That does make sense.
I didn't tell them.
Right.
So tell us what's coming up for you for the rest of 2025 and early 2026.
Yeah, thank you for asking that. So in our organization, we've made some exciting changes and updates. One of the key ones is we've added a client success manager. And the whole intent there is we want to make sure that we're very well plugged into our clients, either existing clients or clients that we'd like to have our organization. So that's why rather than call it a salesperson or business development or any of those terms, we're calling it client success because that's where we want our mindset to be. And the big push for us, especially going forward, is to make sure that we're reaching out and we're connecting with other organizations who need our services around the talent management, talent acquisition. So up to this point, Jason, we've relied a lot on just our network and social media postings and having people who know us reach out and say, hey, Kyle, I've known you for years, or hey, in person, I've known you for years. We'd love to work with you. To now where we're going out and we're saying, you know what, we want to work harder to nurture those relationships. We need someone who's dedicated to doing that outreach on a day-to-day basis and nurture those relationships with us. So for us, that's the most exciting thing going forward is we really want to devote our time and our resources to nurturing our existing relationships and continuing to build relationships with organizations who need and can benefit from our services.
That's terrific. For everyone watching or listening right now, what's the one thing we can all start doing to attract and retain the best talent for our organization today?
Meet people where they are. Make those personal connections like you and I talked about. If you're out somewhere, and I have a practice of doing this, if I meet somebody and I'm impressed with them, I always give them my card. I called an organization yesterday to actually cancel my membership because we found something better. And I had a great young lady on the phone that I was talking to. You know what I did? I said, gosh, if you're ever looking for another opportunity, I'd love to connect with you. Because I was impressed with how she conducted herself and how she handled this call very professionally and navigated me through it. And again, those are tough because I'm calling in to cancel, but she was very professional and very tactful in that relationship. Well, I meant it when I said I'd love to hire her. Gosh, if I could hire her for this company, I would. But I made the effort to make that connection. I encourage other leaders to do that. If you're impressed with people that you meet, let them know that you're impressed and make a connection there. In fact, in our business model, we have numerical goals of how many connections that we need to be making on a weekly and monthly and yearly basis. And it's not about generating business. It's strictly about making connections with people because we think there's a value in that. And we think there's a deficit of that in this world. There's not enough people making connections with others.
Well, this has been really great. I want to thank you for joining us today, Kyle. Where can everyone watching or listening find you so they can also thank you for joining us today?
Well, they can certainly do a Google search, and if you do HRKyle or HRKyle Services, you're going to find us. Of course, we've got the market cornered on that phrase HRKyle, but they can also visit our website at hrkyle.com.
And we'll get all those links in the episode description so you don't have to write any of that down while you're driving your car right now listening to this. So I do want to thank you all for watching and listening. If you found this conversation valuable, go ahead and share it with someone who can use it. Leave us a comment. Don't forget to subscribe. And if you're on a podcast platform and can leave a review, please leave us a 5-star review. It helps build the audience and it lets us get all these interviews with great guys like Kyle out to more people. We've got lots more of this coming your way. So go out there. Do great things today. Onward and upward.